A man is most invisible when he is at peace, not when he is rich, not when he is loud, not even when he is loved, but when he is no longer seeking permission to exist, when he has stopped asking the world to reflect him back through the eyes of a woman. That is when he becomes a ghost to society and a god to himself. Epicurus understood this, not as a rebellion, but as a surgical extraction of noise. While the world feasted on each other's attention like starving dogs in a cage, he slipped out the back unnoticed, into a garden, into silence, into a life where no woman's mood decided his morning and no ring determined his worth. And now you, modern man, stand in ruins, not of buildings, but of beliefs. Your masculinity has become a bargaining chip, your solitude, a diagnosis, your freedom, a red flag. You've been taught that a man alone is a man incomplete, but I ask you, what kind of man needs another to finish his sentence? Who convinced you that wholeness had hips? You were not born with this hunger. It was taught, passed down like a family curse. The idea that your identity is unlocked by her approval, that your worth is measured by how many women want you, how happy you can make them, how quickly you can submit to their calendar of expectations. You call it love. Epicurus would have called it insanity, because the moment you need another to confirm your purpose, you've traded your soul for a smile. But here's the secret they never printed in your textbooks. A man who learns to live without applause becomes immune to manipulation. A man who is at home in silence cannot be blackmailed with loneliness, and a man who thrives in singleness is the most dangerous man alive, because he cannot be bought, baited, or broken. His peace is not a performance. It is a fortress. Epicurus didn't hide from life. He refined it. He carved out a version of existence that wasn't dependent on seduction or status. He didn't demonize women. He simply refused to worship them. He recognized that pleasure is not in the chase, but in the absence of chaos. That comfort is not found in her arms, but in the absence of torment. And yet here you are, worshipping the altar of affection, praying to be chosen, devouring your own dignity in the hopes that it might be enough. You buy dinners you can't afford for women who don't even like you, say yes when you mean no, smile when you're dying inside, all because you fear the one thing Epicurus embraced like a lover, being alone. You fear the silence because it holds a mirror, and you know that once the noise fades, you will meet the man you've avoided your whole life. Not the one who poses for photos or performs for dates, but the one who stares back at you in the dark. The one with unanswered questions, unmet goals, and unclaimed power. And that, my friend, terrifies you more than rejection ever could. But that is exactly where Epicurus wants you to begin. Then lean in, because we're about to tread into the very territory that modern life has forbidden men to explore. The idea that your freedom might not be a flaw, but your final form. You see, the single man, if he is truly single in mind, not just in marital status, is not incomplete. He is rare. He is the last remaining creature that remembers how to breathe without begging for air. He doesn't ask what he brings to the table because he is the table. He is the chair, the room, the house, the entire structure within which purpose unfolds. But most men don't make it that far. They get stuck in the middle. They become wanderers in the desert of desperation, chasing mirages they mistake for meaning. They date to feel valuable, marry to feel validated, and suffer endlessly under the weight of unmet expectations they had no business carrying. You can spot these men from a distance. They're the ones who whisper, "Happy wife, a happy life," with dead eyes and twitching smiles. They've been domesticated, Daniel, like wolves taught to fetch, like lions trained to wear tuxedos and smile for wedding photos. Epicurus would look at these men and weep, not because they failed, but because they never questioned why they were running to begin with. This is where Epicurean thought becomes a kind of surgical instrument, ruthless in its clarity. He doesn't tell men to avoid women, he tells men to avoid unnecessary disturbance. And when the modern relationship becomes a minefield of emotional expectations, constant communication, social surveillance, financial entanglement, and identity entrapment, how can you claim peace? When her approval is the thermostat of your self-worth, you are not a man. You are a butler in an invisible palace. Epicurus writes, "The wealth required by nature is limited and easy to procure. But the wealth required by vain ideals extends to infinity. Now read that again, but replace wealth with love. And suddenly, you begin to see why men are exhausted. You are not exhausted because you're alone. You are exhausted because your ideal of love demands you mutilate yourself just to be seen as worthy. So you shrink. You compromise. You cut pieces off your character to make yourself fit into frames you had no hand in designing. And the tragedy? You believe this sacrifice is noble. You think you're doing something virtuous. But in reality, you are like a man throwing his map into the ocean, just to hear someone say, "You're going the right way." You are tired because you gave away the steering wheel of your life for the comfort of not having to drive alone. But Epicurus didn't just reject this trade, he exposed it. He lived among close male companions, in simplicity, discussing philosophy under the trees, growing his own food, and pursuing pleasure that did not enslave. The paradox? He found more joy in less. He found more stability in solitude than most men find in marriage. The modern world calls that weird, but maybe the modern world is sick. And so I ask you now, not as a preacher, but as a fellow man, have you ever truly sat in your own company without seeking escape? Have you ever woken up, brewed your coffee, and thought not of who should be lying next to you, but of what still lies within you? If not, then your singleness is not your enemy. It is your last chance. The moment you stop romanticizing your dependency, you begin to reclaim your divinity. Let us descend, beyond the slogans, beyond the soft lies your heart clings to like childhood blankets, into the very marrow of why single men thrive, and why most never will. Because thriving, in the Epicurean sense, is not surviving with a smile. It is not comfort dressed in dopamine. It is the quiet conquest of inner chaos. And this is precisely where most men fail. Not because they are weak, but because they were never taught that stillness is strength. You were told to hustle, to grind, to acquire, but no one told you how to be, especially not in the absence of female warmth. You fear being alone because you confuse silence with insignificance, but Epicurus taught that a man who fears being alone will fear everything, and that fear becomes the architect of his enslavement. You don't choose love, you choose to be chosen. That's your first sin. You walk into relationships not as a sovereign, but as a beggar in a tuxedo, smiling, complimenting, hoping, dying a little every time she doesn't reply fast enough. You mistake this for romance. It's not. It's spiritual suicide. And it begins early. From the moment you were praised for being nice, rewarded for compliance, raised to serve, trained to keep the peace in exchange for the possibility of affection. Every classroom, every dinner table, every film whispered the same poison. To be wanted is to be worthy. You didn't learn to build a kingdom. You learned to decorate a cage. But here's what Epicurus grasped, and what modern men must urgently remember. The highest human experience is not found in passion, it is found in peace. And peace is impossible when you outsource your emotional temperature to the mood swings of someone else. What does this mean for the single man? It means that what the world calls lonely, Epicurus called free. It means that every night you sleep alone, every weekend you spend with your own thoughts, every meal you prepare without an audience. These are not symptoms of lack. They are symptoms of liberty. And let's be brutally honest. How many men in relationships today are truly free? Free to dream without asking. Free to speak without filtering. Free to walk away without ruining their lives. You see them, smiling in pictures, nodding in restaurants, attending therapy to discuss how to be better partners, as if their masculinity is a disorder to be managed, not a force to be honored. But the single man who follows Epicurus knows better. He no longer treats his solitude like a waiting room. He knows it's a temple, a space where his mind sharpens, his soul settles, and his time becomes entirely his own. He reads not to impress, but to understand. He exercises not to attract, but to conquer the laziness within him. He builds not for applause, but because creation is in his blood, and most dangerously of all, he becomes unbothered by rejection, by trends, by whether or not she thinks he's emotionally available. He no longer bends, he no longer performs, and in doing so he becomes invisible to shallow women and visible only to those with depth. That is what it means to thrive. You are not unloved because something is wrong with you. You are unloved because the standards of the modern world reward submission, not sovereignty, and your refusal to grovel makes you terrifying. But brother, be terrifying, because the world doesn't need more agreeable men, it needs more sovereign ones, and sovereign men are forged in silence. Women were only the mirror. What you feared was your own reflection in their eyes, the truth that you had no identity outside of being desired, the truth that your greatness had been negotiated away for crumbs of comfort, that every "I love you" you chased was really a mask you wore to avoid confronting the fact that you'd never built anything within. Epicurus saw through this illusion with a blade so sharp it still cuts today. He understood that the world doesn't oppress men with chains, it does it with distractions. Cheap pleasures, shiny promises, warm bodies that cool with time. You think you're choosing pleasure, but you're just choosing dependency in a prettier bottle. He warned us. Of all the means to ensure happiness throughout the whole life, by far the most important is the acquisition of friends. But we replaced friendship with infatuation, brotherhood with hookups, truth with performance. And so you walk around with a grin stitched onto your soul like a wound covered in perfume. You say you're happy, but only when she's texting, only when she's watching, only when you're useful. You've turned your heart into a vending machine. You insert kindness, effort, money, time, and you expect affection in return. But this isn't love. It's commerce. It's negotiation wrapped in poetry. And Epicurus would laugh, not out of mockery, but sadness, because you've been told to fear the single life, that it means no legacy, no love, no warmth. But here's the real question. If being single means you finally confront your own hunger, your own silence, your own madness, is that truly a curse? Or is that the very alchemy that turns men into kings? Think about it. The most powerful ideas in history, the most radical creations, the deepest meditations, did they come from the arms of lovers or the fires of isolation? Do you think Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations in a candlelit dinner with his wife? Do you think Da Vinci painted while replying to texts? Do you think Epicurus himself found enlightenment while arguing over where to eat? Number. They withdrew. They detached. Not because they hated people, but because they knew that greatness requires stillness, and stillness cannot grow in a house built on emotional turbulence. So ask yourself now, and do it honestly. Have I ever truly been alone? Or have I just been between women? Has your singleness ever been deliberate? Or was it always just an accident you tried to fix? Until you can choose solitude as a path, not a punishment, you are not single. You are just stranded. But the man who is truly single, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, he becomes a volcano of potential. He doesn't need to seek validation because he has replaced external approval with internal order. His days are shaped not by the weather of her emotions, but by the architecture of his own intentions. And when that man finally does choose to love, if ever, he does it from abundance, not lack, from fullness, not famine, from truth, not thirst. But first, he must earn the right to be whole. And that, my brother, is the journey the world keeps mocking, because it fears what you might become if you ever complete it. The death of the modern man's myth of usefulness. You think you are thriving because you're helpful, because you're needed, because she leans on you, calls you when she's sad, texts you when her world is crumbling. But usefulness is not love, it's employment. And the moment your value is rooted in utility, you are no longer a partner, you are a tool, replaceable, predictable, breakable. Epicurus taught us that peace begins when need ends, not only the needs of the stomach, but the needs of the ego. And what is modern romance if not a contract of mutual ego feeding? You tell her she's perfect. She tells you you're strong. You buy her dinner. She gives you affection. You say yes when you want to say no. She says maybe when she means never. And you both pretend this is love. It is not. It is polite warfare. The single man who thrives has exited the battlefield, not because he lost, but because he saw that the war was a distraction. Epicurus walked away from the city, from politics, from public ambition, not because he was weak, but because he understood that freedom is not earned in conquest, but in withdrawal. And what you must understand now is this: if your identity requires constant maintenance by others, then you are still enslaved. If your peace depends on whether or not she still loves you, then you are living on borrowed oxygen. You are not lonely. You are unfamiliar with yourself. And this is where singleness becomes sacred, not as a delay of destiny, but as the only state where you finally meet the raw, unvarnished self, the version of you that has nothing to prove, no flowers to buy, no pictures to post, no jealousy to provoke, just a man, breathing, unwatched, unapplauded, unapologetically alone. Can you handle that? Can you sit in a room, unplugged from performance, and still feel significant? Most can't. They rush back to the apps, back to the banter, back to the small talk that masks the large emptiness inside them. But not you. Not if you walk the Epicurean path. Because this path, though quiet, is brutal in its honesty. It asks you, what do you do when there's no one to impress? What do you believe when no one is around to agree? What kind of man are you when she's not watching? The answers you find there, those are your real character. That's why Epicurus didn't build temples. He built gardens, quiet spaces, natural places, where thinking replaced chasing, where wisdom replaced desire, where depth replaced drama. His followers weren't lovers in crisis. They were thinkers in communion, friends, not followers, conversation, not confession. And this is the second truth that must pierce you. The man who thrives in singleness doesn't isolate, he refines. He doesn't run from connection, he elevates it. He chooses who enters his space, not out of arrogance, but out of sacred discipline. Because when your peace becomes valuable, you stop selling it cheaply. That's why modern men are broke, not in wallet, but in will. They sell their energy for flirtation, their dreams for comfort, their fire for the false promise of emotional security. But the thriving single man, he spends his hours like gold, he guards his mind like a fortress, he plants thoughts like seeds and waters them with silence. And in time, the world wonders how he became so untouchable, so wise, so composed. But they forget, it's because he had the courage to walk alone long enough to become whole. Most men will go to their graves with songs unsung, talents unused, and silence unmastered. Not because they were weak, but because they were distracted. Distracted by the idea that love would redeem them, that a woman's attention would restore what was stolen in childhood, that devotion to someone else would finally grant them permission to be. But Epicurus would look them in the eyes and ask, who gave you the idea that you were broken to begin with? The world sells you completion. Epicurus gave you sufficiency. The world tells you, find the one. Epicurus tells you, find your center. The world hands you a checklist of status symbols, marriage, mortgage, maternity photos, and dares you to call it purpose. But Epicurus hands you an empty page and says, write what matters. And the most important truth on that page? You were always enough, alone. But here's where the guilt must enter. Because even after hearing all this, many men will still return to the cage. They will keep seeking comfort over character, pleasure over principle, affection over ascension. And the tragedy isn't just personal, it's generational. Sons will watch fathers beg, brothers will mimic weakness, and the entire lineage will forget what power sounds like. You, listening to this now, you have a choice. You can continue to build your identity on how well you serve her emotions, or you can begin the sacred work of becoming unshakable. You can keep asking what women want, or you can finally ask what you were created to be. Not in theory, in practice, with discipline, with solitude, with fire. Because the man who thrives in singleness isn't just rejecting romance, he's rejecting dependency. He's refusing to rent his soul for temporary warmth. He's choosing stillness over chaos, autonomy over approval, self-respect over self-erasure. And in doing so, he becomes what Epicurus always pointed toward. Not a monk, not a player, not a hermit, but a man who is finally free. And if love ever comes, let it come not to fill a hole, but to share a garden. Let it come not to rescue you, but to walk beside you in your completeness. Because only then will it be real. Until that day, water your mind, guard your time, master your silence, And for the love of everything holy, do not apologize for being alone, because in the kingdom of Epicurus, the man who walks alone walks the furthest. If this message shook something in you, if it made you pause, reflect, or realize the ways you've betrayed yourself for the illusion of being wanted, then now is the time to act. Like, share, subscribe, and support this channel using the link in the description, not for clout, but because this is the kind of truth the world needs. Not softer men, not louder noise, but quieter strength.